You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 137 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and joining me this week, as he does every single week, is the gentleman that runs our Twitter page, my good brother and good friend. It's Liam. Liam, season's greetings to you. Hard to believe that we have reached Christmas week here. We are smack dab in the middle of Hanukkah, and we are celebrating accordingly here at the DCAU Review.
That's right. As is tradition, the last Saturday before Christmas every year, we try to find a holiday-themed DCAU cartoon to review. We're running low on them, quite frankly.
I was say we basically have one left.
Based on our decision to review Batman in order, we're quite a bit away from both Bullet for Bullock and Holiday Nights, so it's going to be a little bit. We're going to have to figure some stuff out for next year. But for this year, we were able to find another main continuity DCAU holiday tale, and that is, of course, the Static Shock episode, Frozen Out.
Well, that's right. Well, we will have the opportunity at some point to do what we started this week, a new tradition, and that being what we call a watch-along episode. We release our bonus episode where we did a watch-along that you can actually watch with us and listen to our commentaries. We watch Christmas with the Joker, so you can check that out at DCAUreview.com if you have not done so already, also on your standard podcast feeds. But Liam, this week, as you said, we are smack dab in the middle of talking about Static, and excited to cover this episode. As you said, it is a holiday-themed episode here, and touching on some real-world, real-life subjects, as Static was apt to do at times. So before we get into this week's episode, I'm sure you have the Imdb Synopsis, the official one that is, rip-roaring and ready to go for this week's episode, which is, if we didn't mention, called Frozen Out. And this episode actually debuted back a little bit after Christmas, February 22nd, 2002. So we were just finishing celebrating Valentine's Day, and we were learning about the true meaning of Christmas. So let's get that IMDb synopsis, though, out of the way.
Absolutely, and this is for the episode Frozen Out, which was written by Len Yulee, directed by Dave Kleistek, I'm going to say. Apologies if I'm butchering that. Music by Richard Wolf, and animation by both Slightly Offbeat Productions and Top Draw Animation. So we had two animation companies on this one. And that synopsis reads as such. In the midst of the holiday season, Virgil's eyes are open to the homeless population in Dakota who need help and care. Especially one bang baby with PTSD that cause her powers of winter weather to act up. I just want to remind people, I read these verbatim. I don't edit. So, unless it's like completely not a sentence, in which case I will. But
sentence structure there, poor.
Yes.
That gets a rating of poor from me.
Yes. If you can parse together what we're talking about as we jump into plot here, it is, in fact, the holiday season. Virgil, it is winter time, where a giant snowstorm has hit Dakota. Virgil's busy doing all of this static-related work. It keeps making him late, or he keeps missing things. He arrives late at Frida's menorah lighting for the final night of Hanukkah. He's talking about all these other holiday parties he has to go to. He mentions he has a friend with a Ramadan celebration. He mentions Kwanzaa and, of course, Christmas and New Year's.
Hi.
So, how did your patrol go tonight? Good. I've accounted for almost every metahuman in town.
Yeah, maybe things will stay quiet.
They better. I've been invited to a lot of parties, and I'm not gonna miss them. Daisy's having an early Kwanzaa thing. Omar's doing a Ramadan feast. Then there's Christmas, New Year's.
What's this? Hey, Arthur, pay the light bill, will you?
Hey, the whole block's gone dark.
I've got a funny feeling. Richie, it's just a power failure. Come on, let's hit the buffet.
He's sort of just fed up with having to be static and do the holiday stuff at the same time. He wants to just relax, but of course he is thrown into action when the power substation nearby completely freezes over. And that's sort of our introduction to this character of Permafrost, who becomes a vehicle to, as a lot of Static Shock episodes did, not a lot, but certainly a few each season it seemed, it tackled in a very special episode style sort of infotainment way. They tackle the very serious topic of homelessness, specifically homelessness when it pertains to the winter and the holiday season, and how those less fortunate than us deal with this sort of things, and we sort of blow that up to a superhero-sized problem from there.
Yeah, they also sprinkle in some information or some commentary about the sort of linked homelessness with mental illness, and the population that deals with both of those difficulties. So as we go through here, and as Static sort of starts doing his best to try and help the city out as these sort of random winterized events keep popping up. He thaws out a power station, and then later on he's shopping at the mall, and a similar event occurs where the random ice shooting up, and he happens to recognize a young lady that he had run into at the power station, and that's this very pale girl dressed up, pale to the point where she's blue, dressed up in a parka, and she's sort of walking around muttering, and he had sort of paid her no mind when she was at the power station. She asked if he had any money, and he sort of brushed her off, and then he's pointed out while he's at the mall to that how sad she looks, and how sad it is that she's sort of walking around sort of aimlessly in the mall, and so there's some commentary to be had about that, I guess. And then this girl, Permafrost, she ends up in this store where she sees this crystal angel, I guess, and this sort of causes her to have these flashbacks to her childhood. We get the full story later on of kind of her backstory told in a very unique way, but because of this interaction that she has with a salesperson who's very rude to her and tries to get her out of the store, she sort of reacts and causes this other event. She has her first sort of interaction with Static, where she creates this winterized event. She does escape out of the mall at that point, but then we go on. Kind of moving through the plot here, we do get her backstory, which we learn she was an orphan who looks like her parent or maybe step-parent walked out on her and her mom, and her mom at some point was dealing with some sort of illness and passes away, and she's sort of remanded to protective services, and was not very interested in doing that. So she runs away from them, and I guess that's how we learn that she ended up becoming homeless. So she had this very traumatic experience of one parent leaving her, another parent, passing away from a serious illness, and then being remanded at least into custody temporarily into protective services, and her running away because of her experiences there.
Yeah, and that's sort of the tragedy of the episode, I guess, is they really do zero in on that, and there's a little bit of, especially I think there's a scene later in the episode where Static's trying to reason with her, and she tells him, "You don't know what it's like. People just look right through you." And Static has a moment where he realizes that he did that exact thing to her multiple times.
Is that why you did what you did at the mall and the power station?
Those families, all happy and warm in their homes, they have no idea how it is out here. When you're homeless, people look right through you. It's like you're not even there.
Yeah, I've been guilty of that.
I thought when I got these powers, things would get better for me. They didn't. I'm more alone now than ever.
And sort of the way that it is tough. It is hard for for homeless people. And we also, it reminded me a bit of the Batman the Animated Series episode, one of my favorites, The Forgotten, in that there's no real happy ending. There's a scene where Static, while looking for this girl, notices this abandoned warehouse where he finds a bunch of homeless people sort of holed up, and like it's shown like all of those people are still homeless at the end of this episode.
Right.
Like the problems are not all magically solved at the end.
Right.
Like this is still, it's very much shown that, and that's sort of the message that the Reverend is giving. They have an interfaith service at the end where they say whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim, the one thing that we're all called to do in all of our faiths is to care for those who, care for the poor, the sick, the downtrodden, and that's kind of the message shown, and that's sort of paired with footage of the mother and children who had helped Static find Permafrost earlier, going to a homeless shelter. And so yeah, it is one of those things where we do get a happy ending for this girl, for Permafrost, in that Static kind of talks her down, and eventually she agrees to go back into a homeless a program for homeless children, and hopefully get herself back on the right path. But it doesn't attempt to tell you that everything is sunshine and rainbows. When Virgil asks the Reverend, is she going to be okay? The Reverend honestly answers, he doesn't know. He doesn't know if this is going to work out this time, but that he has faith that it will. And that's kind of, it is interesting to me that that's kind of a secondary element. And while it doesn't zero in on one particular faith, that is kind of the one little nugget of hope in this episode, among a very deep and heavy subject matter, is that you try to help them out one at a time, and you hope when you offer them the help that they're able to take it, and that they're able to that things work out better for them next time. And it's not a super happy, kids show Christmas tale where it's just be nice to people. Like, there's a lot of deep, heavy subject matter to it, and I think they handle it pretty appropriately with the superhero action thrown in, of course, because it's a superhero show. But I think they do a good job they give you a happy ending for this one character without trying to pretend like that means this is no longer a problem for millions of other people in the country and in the world.
And I think even within that, the nuance, like you said, is that they don't really tell you that everything is okay, or that what happens with her story, and they don't promise that. It's very real that if we played this out, that she goes into that program and doesn't like it and ends up back out on the street, which is real life unfortunately with a lot of the homeless population. But yeah, I would agree with you. I think that I like that they tried something different, and I think that we mentioned this when we cover that episode of The Forgotten, that episode didn't really have it was talking about the homeless, but there wasn't really, I don't know that there was really a message that they were trying to get through. This tries to get the message through. I don't know that they were super effective based on the way that they chose to. It's very corny at times.
Yes.
It feels very much like a PSA, or like you're being talked to. And again, you take into consideration, this is a children's cartoon. Batman the Animated Series was a children's cartoon, but written for an adult audience at times. Mm-hmm. This, I don't know that this was more on the side of, this is a children's cartoon for children, written for children, to deal with sort of, now it's dealing with something that, again, you don't turn on Charlie Brown Christmas and hear them talking about the homeless population right. or mental illness. So obviously it's doing its part to sort of introduce these real world, real difficulties to a children's audience. But in doing so, at times, I feel like at times the message between mental illness and homelessness sort of gets lost. Like they don't go real far down on one or the other.
Yes.
So with that, it sort of feels like a gloss over. Like either you're supposed to assume or understand that what the difficulties are with having somebody that deals with mental illness, which there are other episodes of Batman Beyond or other episodes of that deal with sort of that mental illness factor, even Batman the Animated Series that deal with that mental illness side of things. Sure. So I think if this, and the danger also is to make this character who did nothing wrong. This character did nothing. She didn't go out and try to get these powers. She's simply responding in ways that, unfortunately, that her PTSD and her mental illness really justify in a way. So you risk the chance that somebody, especially a child, I think watching this, perceives mental illness as bad, or villain, which is we talked about it briefly in some episodes. Has been a comic book trope for a very, very long time. Yes. And obviously there's nuances to that, and there's ways that you're able to take that and see that, well, they've been given an opportunity, but really mental illness is something that people have been made either scary or villainous for a very, very long time. So I think that with a cartoon I think that they were very, very careful in trying to be very inclusive. Like we mentioned, they mentioned multiple religions. They have interfaith services. They're trying to really spread things out here and make it seem very politically correct. I think there is a chance, because you made the person with a mental illness the villain, that a child could come away from this seeing, and yes, at the end she accepts help and she realizes that her heart is sort of warmed because Static sees her finally. Yeah. But that's my one nitpick with it, and why I think I didn't give it a higher score is because if you had just done Homeless, and I understand that the history, bringing in her backstory and how she ended up homeless was important to the character, and did add depth to that character, but making her the sort of adversary to Static and causing this chaos out of her insanity, or for her mental illness. It's tiptoeing close to that, and I felt like was a swing and a miss.
No, I think that's fair. I think that is definitely a danger you run into, and it's established. And I almost think they almost leave it in kind of a gray area, because it almost seemed to me at first that she didn't realize she was doing it. Right. Like when she shows up at the power station and just asks Static for change, it doesn't seem like she was just raining down giant icicles on him. Correct. Like and same thing in the mall. She's kind of just walking around, and only when the worker at the store, when she's looking at the glass statue of the angel, tells her to leave, does the cold weather start. So it almost seems like at first like it's triggering. Her powers are triggered by her PTSD, her mental illness from this terrible experience she had as a child.
Imagine if it was more of a Man-Bat type thing where, Kirk Langstrom doesn't realize that he's transforming, or, that even in the follow-up episode, Terror in the Sky, where Francine doesn't realize that she's doing these things as Man-Bat. So if she comes to, she kind of goes into this blind rage where her illness sort of influences, to me, that makes it a much more sympathetic, it's straight up sympathetic at that point, as opposed to, well, she's also kind of doing this in anger because Static has her picture.
Right. Yeah. So I like I said, I think obviously everyone involved in this' hearts were in the right place with this story.
For sure.
But I definitely think, especially as you pointed out, this is a show for children, and you do run the risk of, if you're just a kid and you're kind of half watching it, you just see Static's fighting a girl who has ice powers, and right. And all that other stuff might kind of wash over you. So but obviously, like I said, I think the points they hit on are still strong, and I do like the ending there, because again, it feels like our hero is in a different place than he was at the start of the episode, and it's not your typical Christmas special moral where it's just be nice and share and like very generic stuff. Like they go very specifically on this homeless thing, but I do agree that there's the execution is clunky, and talking about the different causes of homelessness, I think that's very good. I think that's something that many adults as well as children need to be more educated on, is the varying causes of why people end up unhoused. But I do think that's the execution at the end is a little bit clunky. Like I said, I still think it's a pretty strong story, and I went with an 8 out of 10 for my plot.
Okay. I went a little bit lower. I went a 6 out of 10. One of the things that we love, and again, it's very difficult to compare these, comparing these across between Batman the Animated Series and this are very difficult. Obviously, they're written by different people, different audiences at the time. This wasn't even supposed to be DCAU at that time, as we've established. But you look at the way that some of those things were, some of those more serious things were tackled in Batman the Animated Series, and one of the things that I think appealed to both kids and adults, or still does with that show, is that it never feels like the show is talking down to its audience. This, at times, feels like the one scene, and again, I appreciate the fact that they have the scene where the pastor is sharing, the reverend is sharing why there are different causes for homelessness and giving Static this insight. But it feels like he's talking down to Static in a way that he's also talking down to the audience. Yeah, it's when he's rattling off specific statistics about the 7 million homeless people and listing their and we'll get into that a little bit, I think, in voice acting as well. But yeah, I definitely think that there's the messaging, while good, and everyone being in the right place mentally, and maybe it was just the execution was a little clunkier, and maybe that prevented both of us from giving it an even higher score than we did. Yeah, I think the heart was in the right place, but maybe just for me, there were some things that I would have liked to have seen a little bit less PSA-like, I think. Fair enough. All right, let's move on to our next category, Liam, which is going to be animation and visuals. Interesting that you mentioned that there are 2 different companies that work on this one. Now, as we've said, this is Season 2. We reviewed episodes last week from Season 1. There's a significant change in the way that things look coming from Season 3 and 4. This one, to me, I think it was interesting. We talked about off-air before we went on. You were interested to see whether or not there was a great change between Season 1 and Season 2, and I think we kind of got our answer. Yeah, it's not a stark jump. Like, there's a lot of this episode takes place at night, so there is a little more shadow work. Maybe that's just coincidence. But so it does look a little better than some of those daytime action scenes that we talked about last week. And the title sequence, or the opening video, is definitely better animated than Season 1 is. But it's still definitely a far cry from even the later seasons of this show, much less, Justice League or any of the other DCAU proper shows. For sure. I think for me, the most interesting visual aspect of that was certainly Permafrost's powers. There's a couple of different scenes. To me, I think the scene in the mall was the first standout, and then their sort of battle towards the end also. She rains down these sort of these icicles or ice picks from the sky that come through the ceiling, and those are raining down. And in the mall scene, Static has to he's on his is there a name for his hoverboard? Oh gosh, there is, but I can't. I'll have to look that up. All right, so he's riding, his vehicle thing lid, trash can lid in Season 1 that now is an actual disc. So he's kind of riding that in and out of these icicles. I thought that was actually animated pretty well. Mm-hmm. By the way, it's called the Static Saucer, according to the DCAU wiki. So that's what we're going with. I love it. That's the Static Saucer. Okay, so he's riding the Static Saucer in and out. I thought that looked good. I think there's some good appropriate holiday wear. We get Virgil wearing a winter turtleneck. That's right. At the beginning. Non-traditional clothing for when he's in a suit near the end there when he goes to church. So. Very special episode of Static. We get different looks. So other than that, there is a scene also later on where Permafrost is running through traffic and she's kind of dodging cars. That one stood out to me also. There was some good work in there. And I wonder if that other animation department was brought in to do some of those sort of, more three-dimensional looking, more difficult panoramic shots, because those looked the most impressive, but they were not the majority of the episode. The majority of the episode to me still looks like a pretty low-budget cartoon. There's not a lot of movement from characters. As we said, there's a lot of what seems to be dialogue and a lot of PSA type.
Yes.
Type
a lot of talking.
A lot of talking, so characters are kind of standing still. Was there anything that stood out for you?
Yeah, other than what we talked about, just some minor visual things, like you already mentioned different outfits. Static is wearing his goggles down over his eyes for a lot of this episode because you have the snow and the wind blowing. So it makes sense, but it was just one of those things where I'm sure we see it a few other times in the series, but it's pretty rare, I feel like. So that's just having these big yellow goggles on during a couple of the fight scenes it made that a little bit unique. And Static, when he's in the mall and he's sort of encased in this giant pillar of ice and he melts all the way down and then creates a door for himself, I thought that was pretty clever. I don't know about the physics of electricity melting ice.
They do it a lot in this episode,
yes,
though.
But they say that it can. Like, I don't know if electricity would just crack the ice or if it would actually melt it like that, or how exactly that would work. Any scientists listening, feel free to at me at DCAU Review and let me know if lightning can actually melt ice like that. But
if there's a crossover crowd of scientists listening to our podcast, by the way, I
know at least one doctor does.
Well, thank you for anybody who listens. But
yes.
If you have any insight on that. The only other visual that I would say, Liam, that I thought that was played really, really well, and that was, we could have talked about it in plot, I guess, but the flashback scene where we kind of get Permafrost's backstory. I love that there is very little dialogue. It's not her narrating the story of what happened to her. There is some dialogue from characters within it, but you pretty much kind of put things together as they're happening to her. And I thought that flashback sequence was actually done really, really well. You see her as a child, you see her mom, this shadow is over whoever the father or parental figure was, the male parental figure. That walks out on her. You don't really ever see his face. Coincidentally, he's also cut out of her family photo later on. Yeah. So I thought that spoke volumes a lot and actually was pretty effective. And then they sort of phase it back in as she's experiencing these PTSD experiences later as Static says the same line that the person from Protective Services said. Yeah, I think it's all done in like this kind of sepia tone, and then it shifts to kind of more straight up black and white. For some of it as well. It's done in a really interesting way, and that definitely stands out. And just that final little bit there, as we mentioned, when she's sort of yelling at him and he finally just puts a hand on her shoulder and she breaks down and hugs him, and he kneels down to hug her, and like it just feels like that's a moment, and showing that visually that's where our hero really learned the lesson and learned like that's a hero being a hero. Like that's and it shows like Virgil, who even throughout this episode was so focused on partying and wanting to take time off, and here in this moment him just the simple gesture of kneeling down to hug this little girl that's crying is like, that's what a hero does. That's who a hero is, and I like the visual of that as well. Overall, like I said, it's still seasons 1 to 2 of Static Shock, so I couldn't go too high with it, but I went with a 6 out of 10 for visuals. Nice. I went just a tick higher. I went 7 out of 10. I think those scenes that I mentioned were pretty strong. We also didn't mention that there was also this weird B subplot about Static lighting the town Christmas tree, or C subplot or D subplot. Yes. I don't know. Yeah, Richie just calls up the mayor's office. Apparently, it's very easy to like convince someone you're a superhero's publicist, at least in Dakota. But Richie calls up the mayor and tells him that Static's going to show up to light this tree in the middle of town. And
ow! Snowball fight, anyone?
Ask me when I'm awake. In June.
Well, aren't we a cranky little crime fighter this morning? Maybe this'll perk you up.
Static has agreed to light the 50-foot-tall tree at the Dakota City Media Plaza. Sounds cool. Hold on. How did this happen?
Because I set it up. Hello, Councilman's office. This is Static's publicist calling.
Publicist?
Fee, get with the times. You have to promote yourself. Meet and greet. Press the flesh.
We're talking about Christmas Eve here, Richie. I got plans.
Well, that's the price you pay for fame.
I thought it was interesting that the town of Dakota uses these like Tesla-style conductors that to light their Christmas tree. It's not just like a plug in an outlet. It's like these giant gold Tesla-style conductors.
Right, or it wasn't like he like flew up and put the star on the tree or whatever. It was very specifically like no, he's gotta zap it to light it all up. So yeah, it was just a weird little bit there, but yeah, that's kind of a funny bit in the episode where the congressman or the whoever it is won't stop talking, and Static has to bump him out of the way and then fly up to light the tree. It's a pretty funny little sequence there.
All right, let's move on to our next category, Liam, which is going to be music, and we kick off with what I guess is like. They just decided, they're like, we're not paying for the rights for any actual Christmas songs, so we just need you to write a generic-sounding Christmas song that talks about Christmas things, and we're going to play it as the intro.
Yes, both the intro and sort of one of the last shots when they're outside the church. There's what can only be described as a Destiny's Child sound-alike group. But instead of singing like "Joy to the World" or even like something, which I would imagine some of these are in public domain, so I don't know why they didn't just. I don't know, man.
The Happy Birthday song has rights owned.
That's true.
There are rights
That's
that
true.
are owned to the Happy Birthday song.
But yeah,
so.
they didn't use Jingle Bells or anything. Oh Christmas Tree, none of them. The Dreidel song, none of them. No official holiday music was used. Although I feel like a little bit of the Nutcracker soundtrack is used in like a real like techno dancey bit near the end when
Permafrost
when she's hurling the ice at him.
Definitely has some of the Nutcracker Suite or the Sugar Plum Fairy song or something like that.
But that's kind of mixed in with her music. But yes, the highlight, the standout piece of music for me is the discount Destiny's Child singing and it's like they're not even they can't reference any other Christmas songs either. So it's just like generic it's the winter.
Streets are full of joy and the holidays are here.
There are holidays on the calendar this month, but in a voice that sounds like someone trying to sing like Beyonce. It's amazing. It's literally it would be a joke in a Rick and Morty episode or something, or a Simpsons episode or something where there's we're not allowed to use any actual Christmas songs, now sing a Christmas song.
Without referencing any other thing that's ever been mentioned in a Christmas song. As much humor as I got out of that, I'm still not willing to give this music points for humor. I refuse to do that. I refuse to, because I'm grading this on whether it's good, not whether I think it's funny or not, because it's not intentionally supposed to be funny. That's the thing. So because of that, I gave music a 5 out of 10.
All right, I went a little stronger. I went 7 out of 10.
What?
I don't think we need the. I liked Permafrost's little theme there, and some of the other music in the fight scenes. And then yes, I take it as if I enjoyed the music for any reason, that's a plus. Whether it's because it made me laugh or because I genuinely liked it as a piece of music, either way, it works for me. So I gave it a bit of a stronger score, mostly thanks to the bookends of public domain Destiny's Child.
Wonderful. Yeah, that church sequence when they pop back up for the final church sequence, it's literally just one note that they sing, and I literally laughed out loud. I was just what are they doing? It's bookended by these two single held out notes by Discount Destiny's Child.
Speaking of the Happy Birthday song, it'll be starting a scene with to you, and then and then everyone just infers that it's a birthday because everyone's wearing party hats.
So good. All right. That did bring me a lot of joy, so 'tis the season for joy.
That's
Love
right.
that.
That's right.
All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category of the day, which is going to be voice acting. So we have some of our regulars returning, of course, for this week. We have a couple of other additional recognizable voices from prior DCAU appearances, and some new people. So let us talk about this week's voice cast.
Yeah, it's a pretty decent-sized cast. We have a lot of Virgil's friends. Of course, we have Richie by Jason Marsden. We have Danica McKellar as Frida, briefly, who's mad at Virgil because he showed up late to her Hanukkah party, which is being presided over by a young Bernie Sanders, as you pointed out.
He does, and look,
It's the hair, too. It's not just it's an old Jewish man. It's,
right. He looks
the hair and the
and
glasses.
he sounds like him. Like not like he could be him. That's just like they went with stereotypical. That was the one thing that I probably could have critiqued a little bit. Is they went, for some reason, the voice actors in this episode, for the people playing the Jewish people, they went very stereotypical, like borderline offensive choices for the voices.
Yes.
And then the workers that Static interacts with at the power plant all sound like they're from New York for some reason.
Yeah, I always assumed, I mean, maybe just because the name is Dakota, but I always assumed this was like a Midwestern city, like a Detroit type, or maybe even like further west than that, maybe. Like, so, yeah, the idea that there's just, like, every fireman in the state is like, hey, or not fireman, the workers at the power plant are all like, hey, yo, Static, what's going on?
Yeah,
man?
we need you to fix this!
Yeah, it's like, bada bing. Like, it's just very, there's very, I guess what you would call stereotypical voices of, but again, you wouldn't think that would be the stereotype for workers in Dakota, but here we are. But other than that, we have Michael Dorn as Reverend Anderson, who plays a pretty big role in this episode, and of course folks would know him as both the voice of Calabac in Superman the Animated Series, as well as the Superman the Animated Series voice of Steel / John Henry Irons, of course later being replaced, ironically, by Phil Lamar in Justice League Unlimited when Steel reappears, but again, his job in this episode is to do the edutainment portion. So he's the guy who throws out all the stats, along with Kevin Michael Richardson, Virgil's dad. They throw out all the homeless stats at him and talk about the people less fortunate than us. So he's kind of mostly there to lecture. But he still does a solid job. Nothing wrong with the performance. I just feels, again, like we talked about, sort of the execution of that educational part of the show is a little heavy-handed in some of those scenes.
It's a lot of it would be exposition in any other scene.
Yes,
and it's just feels not organic because of the way that it's just thrown out there. He knows all of those homeless facts by heart. I'm just gonna say that.
Yes.
Like the man is dedicated. He's either super dedicated or maybe he has it like tattooed on the inside of his arm or something like that, because he was ready to pull those stats out right away.
That's right. And then, of course, other than Phil Lamar as Static, our main voice actress to talk about this week, playing Permafrost, is one Hynden Walsh, who, of course, folks would probably know as the voice of Starfire on Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go, as well as Harley Quinn on The Batman and a bunch of other projects. So
she shows up later in the Justice League episode Wild Cards also.
Oh, yes, as
Royal
Ace.
Flush Gang.
Yeah. Veteran voice actors here, and again, as we talked about in plot, because part of this is supposed to be that she's like dealing with this, PTSD. She's like talking to herself a lot throughout the episode, and she's talking. At one point, she mentioned when Static asks her name, she's like, "The voices in the dark told me my name is Permafrost," or something like that,
right?
Or call me. And I don't know if that's supposed to be a reference to the other homeless people, or literally, like, she hears voices in her head. Like, that wasn't exactly made clear. But, she does a good job. Again, we have already talked about the sort of clunky way in which you portray mental illness as the villain in an episode, but like I think for what was asked of her, she did a good job.
Oh no, she's really, really good. I mean, it's not a surprise too, based on her voice performance. Whether you love or hate Teen Titans, or you love or hate Teen Titans Go, she's the voice of Starfire to me when I think of Starfire.
Oh, absolutely.
So she's done that very, very well. She plays that innocent young person very, very well. As that's who Starfire is. That's
Yes.
sort of gleefully, blissfully unaware of things, innocent. So to bring her in, obviously this is prior or right around the time that she was doing Starfire for Teen Titans.
Yeah, this would have been I'm guessing the show probably would have already been in production by the time, certainly by the time this episode aired, I'm sure it was.
Yeah,
at least.
2002, it was definitely
Yeah,
in
and I think
heat
the show debuted in early 03, so...
So, there's a reason why she was cast in a role where she's sort of playing this, for lack of a better term, an innocent young lady who is struggling. I think her interactions between her and Phil Lamar, who pulls like quadruple duty in this, or like he plays his own voice of Static, of course. He ends up playing some other ancillary voices of people at the party. He's the radio announcer, or the TV announcer announcing the issue at the power plant. He plays a bunch of people.
That's right. Yeah, one of the voices, I think, in the crowd saying amen at the end as well when the Reverend finishes his sermon. Yeah, he's doing a lot of work here, and I think them together, like we said, because that is sort of the central arc of the episode beyond just education about homeless people, is Virgil kind of being selfish and then learning that learning or relearning the importance of the need to care for others, especially those the weak and those that again she didn't ask to be turned into this. She was a kid living on the streets when the Big Bang accident happened. So I think that really comes through in their interactions, especially, as I said, that final scene where she breaks down and he mentions that I've been guilty of sort of looking past or ignoring this problem too, and so him sort of coming to terms with that I think Phil Lamar does a great job as per usual, and Hynden Walsh does a phenomenal job as well, and for those reasons I gave voice acting a very strong 8 out of 10.
Nice. I went just a tick higher. I went a 9 out of 10. Again, I think for what this episode is, again, the content may not have been great. May not agree with the way the execution of what they were trying to say, but I think the voice performances all the way around, we have a lot of professionals, a lot of people that are used multiple times by Andrea Romano throughout the DCAU, so there's some familiarity there, but you didn't use somebody that was necessarily like I could tell whose voice the Reverend was. I was like, I think that's Steele, right?
Yeah,
called that
right away.
Called that right away. But so it's familiar, but it's people that are voice actors that are used to this, and that there's just like a second level, I think, sometimes in that voice actor department that they're able to bring out a great performance. So having veterans that end up playing major roles across the DCAU or other DC animation was a great move here, even if some of them wouldn't play their more well-known roles till later on.
Right.
So I think it's really, really strong voice acting for this episode. Goes a long way. I couldn't find a bad performance.
Agreed.
All right, Liam. So let's total up our scores here at the end. Totaling everything up, I have a final score of 27 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, and I'm just a little bit higher at 29 out of 40.
Alrighty. So not too much of a disparity there, despite us not agreeing on music again. So I guess it's time to talk about rewatchability here, Liam. This is, I think this is going to be a difficult one for me. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's funny, because this was not... I literally do not know that I had ever watched this episode before we watched it for this week. Like, there's a lot of these statics I do remember seeing, like, I saw this once on a Saturday morning on Kids WB or whatever, but or like I'll think I haven't seen it, and then I'll watch the episode, I'll be like, I kind of remember this part, so I must have seen this at least once. But this one I literally don't think I'd ever seen before, so this was never part of my sort of my holiday Christmas tradition of usually when I'm home late at night on Christmas Eve, I watch Christmas with the Joker, I watch Holiday Nights, I watch Comfort and Joy. That's usually where it ends. So I don't know that this will enter into that yearly rewatch. I do think there's value in it, like I said, because it is another one of those static episodes that tackles a very real life topic in the same way, we talked about them covering racism, or even last week when they talked about sort of some of the ins and outs and the dirty business that goes on in the music industry. Like, this is not your typical Saturday morning cartoon fare, but I guess I would give it a thumb up, because like I said, I do think it's a strong episode, and it does feel like it's important to like building Static into a better hero. But I wouldn't say, I don't know that this is going to be a yearly rewatch for me the way some of those other DCAU cartoons are.
Yeah, I agree, and I think some of it has to do with, we talked about it on our bonus episode this week, that Christmas with the Joker is not a great episode by any means, but there is some nostalgia factor that's wrapped up in it. This episode never stood a chance at having a lot of nostalgia, from what I can tell, based on the fact that they aired it in February. They aired the Christmas episode 2 months after the time that it would have been relevant and had any chance of sort of building some of that nostalgia. With that being said, maybe to somebody this is a yearly rewatch, and if that is the case, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. You can always tweet us at DCAU Review, but I think because of the clunkiness of it, because it sort of does feel at times like a PSA, because of the maybe just the structure of the episode, it is, and it's not like the thing about traditional, and this speaks to the episode, and we pointed that out as something that is good for this, is the reason that people tend to watch things around holiday times over and over again is because you want to feel warm and happy and like things are okay, for better or worse, whether or not that's realistic or not, or whether or not that's you're blindly ignoring what's going on. There's a reason why people will tend to gravitate towards those things and want to escape from the real world.
Right.
So with that said, I think that there's a detriment to this episode because it does focus on so much real world, and there's not as much escapism. With that, like I said, I commend them for it, because that's the real world for a lot of people, and for a lot of people, the holidays are a very difficult time, a very hard time. So to have a commentary on that is certainly commendable. With that said, I don't know that this is one that I will particularly be drawn to every Christmas season, but I can recommend it as, hey, if somebody asks me what DCAU Christmas episodes are there, I now know that I can recommend Frozen Out. There's a Static Shock episode that you should watch.
Absolutely.
If you're interested in watching and getting the full like Christmas experience, episodes here. And another thing that we didn't really tackle that I think is interesting is that they did go out of the norm of what the DCAU tended to do, and that is focus more on various religious aspects of the holiday season, which Batman intentionally steered away from due to standards and practices. And the fact that, realistically, that is what the Christmas season, where it started, why it started, and what for a lot of people the importance of it is. So the fact that they don't straight up ignore that, and they were willing to sort of cross that line also, so that might be something else that interests you too. If you're looking for something other than Santa and the Joker and, the Joker's holiday special, this might be something that's a little bit different too.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely, like I said, and it's as you mentioned, very inclusive, with the interfaith service at the end. Mentioning, and it isn't just allusions. Like, they specifically mention these religions, and if you are someone that was raised with any of those religions, and again, that's, you want something a little bit deeper, touching on again, whether you celebrate Ramadan, or whether you celebrate Hanukkah, or whether you celebrate Kwanzaa, or whether you celebrate Christmas. This one definitely doesn't shy away from that in the same way that other specials, other Christmas specials, and specifically other DCAU Christmas episodes have. So that definitely makes this one a bit more unique.
For sure. All right, Liam. Well, that will wrap us up for this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We are, 'tis the season, as they say. We are just so incredibly thankful and grateful for all of our listeners, especially during this holiday season. We have just had such a great year. We don't do this for numbers, but I can, Liam and I were looking at some of the numbers earlier in the month, and we're really just kind of blown away the amount of people that are interested in listening to us talk about cartoons that are 20 plus years old, almost 30 years old at times, and listen to us ramble on about various different animation and music. So we want to say a special thank you to all of our listeners and each of you that interact with us, whether you listen to the episodes, you interact with us on social media, you've sent us messages, or leave reviews on various podcast platforms. We hope that you have a very, very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a very Happy New Year for the upcoming, much looking forward to 2021.
Absolutely. Definitely, it's really cool. We talked about that from the early days of the show, but especially over the last year. Getting to interact with everyone who does listen to the show and hear their memories and their different thoughts and of the themes of certain episodes. It's so cool and fun, and seeing people share their fan art or their figure photography and things like that. So cool. It's been great kind to grow our little community here over the last year, and we really appreciate that. And it's certainly not a typical holiday season this year. In these uncertain times, as every advertisement will remind you if you turn on your television. So we do thank you for spending a little bit of your holiday season with us, and we hope it is happy, or at least not miserable for everyone out there. And let's we've got one more episode before the new year, Cal, but I too am quite ready to turn the page on the calendar and start fresh in 2021.
Well, we'll see how that goes. But yes, as you mentioned, we have one final episode here in the year 2020. And Liam, that will be another episode of Static Shock that we'll be covering. Why don't you tell the good folks at home what episode we'll be covering?
That's right. And keeping with the theme that we kind of started earlier this month when we reviewed a couple of episodes in our double feature, we're going to look at another sort of Static villain first appearance, and that will be the first appearance of one of the big bads of the whole series, that being Ebon and his group, The Breed, and that will be in the third episode, appropriately titled, The Breed.
Go figure. Yeah, looking forward to Discount Iced Tea impersonation.
Oh, yeah.
Love it. Well, don't forget, you can follow us on social media at DCAU Review, both on Twitter and Instagram. You'll want to check out those for clips and interact with us throughout the week in between episodes. We love talking about upcoming episodes, anything that's happening in the DC universe proper, and of course everything DCAU. Don't forget also, if you like the podcast, you can always support us by going to our store and picking up a shirt, a hat, sweatshirt, something like that. You can go to DCAUreview.com, click on the shop link at the top of the page. That'll take you to our store. Don't forget also to subscribe to us and like us on your favorite podcast app. If it allows you to leave a review, we would love for you to do that, because it helps us with the algorithms, gets more ears on the podcast. Mm-hmm. Also, if you've left a review before, you can actually leave additional reviews. So if you've done it before, thank you. And if you feel like it, doing it again, go ahead and leave another podcast review for us. That helps us out immensely. But looking forward to next week's Static episode. Until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the very next episode of the DCAU Review.
Happy holidays.